Let's talk about starting over. So there is a big difference between starting over and starting something new. And when you're starting over, you're rebuilding from a loss, from having lost something in your life, and you're starting to build. And when you're starting new, you're usually adding to something that's already there. So our topic today is about starting over. Welcome. My name is Janet, and this is the Second Act Collective. So this topic is kind of heavy because it involves loss, it involves grief, it involves dealing with all those feelings that we usually are not happy about. But it's also a process of reinvention, and this is something that usually happens, in midlife when you're in your late 40s, going to 50s and 60s. A lot of times you are forced by situations that either you chose or someone else chose, or they're just circumstances in your life. You are forced to start over. It could be a financial loss, it could be a job loss, it could be a health situation that made you lose a lot of things. Your health deteriorated to a point that you had to start over. It could be a relationship, a divorce, a breakup of a friendship, or a relationship you've had with someone for a long time. So starting over a lot of times involve a lot of emotions that are just not, easy to deal with. And so it's important for us to understand what starting over is, which is the rebuilding, compared to starting something new, which is you're adding on something that's already there. So an example of starting something new would be like you starting a hobby, right? I'm starting a hobby in painting. That's me adding on stuff that I already have. It's something new because it's something that I want to develop, I want to master, I want to get better at. But it's not because I'm starting from something was taken away or something happened that I started this hobby. Is because I'm genuinely interested in learning how to paint. So that's the difference. So in starting over, we also have to understand that there are things that get lost, right? And then there are things we get to keep. There are things that we have to let go, things that we have to keep. There's a loss of identity that happens, which we're going to dive into. There's a loss of maybe social connections, maybe relationships that you had that get lost in the process. There's financial security sometimes. There's a lot of things that have held your life together can kind of get lost in the process of starting over when we're starting over. And what happens is that we sometimes take the loss, right? Is this process of loss as if it's a failure instead of what it is, which is transformation. Because we are always being transformed, we're always growing, evolving. And part of that journey of life, especially in your midlife, is the fact that you're gonna have to let go of some things are gonna be gone, some things are gonna be added. So, but it doesn't mean you don't keep everything. It means there are some things that you still get to keep, even in the process of starting over. Who you are, like inside the core of you still get to keep. You might have to rediscover who that is, but we still get to keep. And there are a lot of other relationships you can also get to keep, depending on what kind of things that are going on in your life. So there are things that we get to keep, the things that we have to let go. And I think the important part of all this is that you get to understand what are you keeping, what has to be let go of. Because not everything is going to move with you into that new season. And knowing that you're moving into a different direction, and you might not keep some relationships, you might not keep the job, you might not keep the business. Whatever it is, you have to determine what needs to be let go, what needs to continue. And that is very important so that you don't carry things into a new season or people into a new season that you shouldn't. And another thing that we look at when we're starting over is that, there's grief that comes. And, you can grieve something that was not working, right? Relationships, a business that you had, a job. even if we're not happy in it, I don't know how this happens, but we still grieve the things that we even know it's good for us to let go. It's good for us to move forward, but but we grieve them. And I think acknowledging and allowing yourself to feel the grief for even the things that their time was up, but it's just hard to let go. It is hard to let go. And because of that, we have this grieving process that we all have to go through in the time when we're starting over and beginning again. And I also want to just talk about the fact that it is okay to start over again and again. And I think I've mentioned this in one of my other videos that, you get to start over as many times as you want. Right. So for myself, my experience is, I had to, I wasn't born in the country that I'm in right now in the States. And I had to, when I moved here, I was starting over. Then I was, in my early 20s. I was starting over. So that was a starting over. And when I got married, there was another starting over because I was starting a life with someone else when I'd been single for a while. And when I left my corporate job to start the company that we had, my first business, that was a start over, right? And then years later, decade and more years later, I left the business that I had and started another one and went into a different industry. That is again starting over. So we get all these chances to start over. And that is the wonderful thing about life, is that you're not stuck to, like, oh, well, I started, this is my third or fourth starting over. You can have as many starting over as you want. And I believe in each time that you're starting over, you are coming from a place of wisdom. You're coming from a place of discernment. You're coming from a place of experience, that you are making better choices in that starting over than you did before. And that is, I think that is the most beautiful thing about starting over. The fact that you are still alive actually says you can start over because you're still alive, because as long as God has you here on earth, it means your days, your time is not up. So you are allowed to start over as many times as you want. So we talked about the grief, grieving the thing that we know was not right for us. And this can be tricky, especially with friends and family, because people are like, well, you complained about these things. You should be happy. Why are you sad that it's ended when it really wasn't good for you? And it's hard to explain unless if someone has gone through it, because even if you knew that the business had come to an end or that it was time to move forward, it doesn't mean you don't feel sad about it, because there is actually some comfort in what you know, right? More than where you're going. There's that comfort of knowing maybe the mediocre, unhappy thing that you had going on. You were comfortable in your pain, which is not a good thing, but we tend to be comfortable in what we're used to, the chaos, the dysfunction, whatever it is, we're comfortable in it to the point that we are happy to stay in it, even though we know we need to get out of it. And this is why a lot of women, we get stuck in relationships, in businesses, in jobs, and stuff that we shouldn't be, because we get very comfortable and scared to move out of what we already know. Some people say it's better to have the devil than the one you don't. I don't agree with that saying, but people get comfortable in their discomforts. And this is why we end up grieving the things that, that we know should have been done a long time. We should have walked away. We have that grieving process, and it's okay. It's natural. There's nothing to be ashamed of. I think a lot of people go through this, and it's okay. So just knowing that you might need that time to grieve this thing that is happening to you, I think that's okay. And also something else in starting over is, how do we start over without erasing, who we've been? Because sometimes we want to start over because we're so ashamed of our past, the mistakes we've made. There's shame, there's anger, there's bitterness, there's all these feelings that are attached to it. But how do we then start over in this new chapter we're in? A lot of us in this stage of life, when you're approaching 50, when you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, you are having again to start over, not because out of choice a lot of times, but because situations have happened. So how do we start over without erasing what we have built, without like destroying everything and just saying, I'm that past is wasted, is is unredeemable. There's nothing I can do. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want to remember it, because we can do that, especially if it's a relationship and there's anger and there's all kinds of bitterness. You can be in that state of I just want that version of me gone and deleted if you can. And yet your past is not really wasted. It never is wasted. And as a Christian, I know that God redeems our past. He uses our past for the greater good. So it's a foundation, right? Your past is a foundation where you do draw wisdom and discernment and understanding to move into this next chapter as a very different person than the person who built that other version of yourself. So we don't necessarily have to erase everything. We can integrate the good things, the things that we've learned, the things that have been, because not even in terrible things, situations, a lot of times there was some happy times, right? Even if you didn't like your job, it doesn't mean you were miserable every day. There were some things that were good. Otherwise, you would not have stayed that long. In a relationship, it doesn't mean that everything was wrong, because you probably had some good times as well. In a business that you started that you're letting go, it doesn't mean that everything went horrific, right? Because there were times that you probably were making money, you were happy with your business, and it's just time to pivot, and that's different. So the goal is to integrate the things that we can carry forward instead of us just erasing every single thing, and to bring the best of who you were then into the person that you're becoming. And this is important so that we are not like starting over and just saying, we feel like we're starting over from zero, but we're really not in this stage of life where we are in the midlife and, we're in our second chapter. There is so much that we can learn from that past. There's so much that we can carry with us that is good, that is helpful. And, being aware of that as you're starting over is good, so that you just, you don't throw away everything. And then the most, I think, impactful thing is that in this starting over, there is an identity shift that's going to happen to you, that's going to happen to me. It has happened to me, just as I've moved from different seasons and, pivoted to different things, is that with this transition into either your second chapter, into this new season you're walking into, there's some identity things that you're going to have to deal with. You're going to go through an identity crisis of who you are, of, what you call yourself. And I think this happens a lot if you're working for someone, or even if you're a business person, an entrepreneur, and you're transitioning into something new. Again, you are not who you want to become yet, but you're also not who you used to be. So you're in this middle gap, this valley of the unknown, where you're trying to figure out yourself, and you don't know how to explain yourself to others, because people say what you do, and you're like, right now, my answer was, I'm in transition, which I was. So of course, I don't really like the asking people what they do question anyway, because I don't think that's what makes a person, right? What you do is not who you are. But, you get asked those questions and you kind of like flounder around because you don't know what to answer, what to say, because you are maybe in transition, you're maybe starting over. So you're not where you want to be. You're not the person that you want to be. You've not achieved the goals that you're going after. And you're also no longer the person you used to be. So in that in between can be very disorienting and can really cause an identity crisis. But I think what it does, and what it did for me, was looking at holding the two versions of myself and addressing things about my own identity or my own beliefs about who I thought I was. Was my identity attached to the roles that I play in life? Was my identity attached to the things that I did, my achievements, so this transition is very powerful if you allow it to be. It can be a very powerful place for you to do some self-examination of what is it that actually defines you. How have you been defining yourself? How Who are you without all the roles? Who are you without the responsibilities? Who are you as a woman? And asking those and really going through those questions and struggling with them and going back and forth and figuring that out is important, so that as you move into your next season, your second act, you're very clear about who you are. You're very clear about what you want. You're very clear about the direction, because a lot of times in life we do not get to do the self awareness work that's needed, the deeper work, because we are just so busy. We are running like robots everywhere. We are just doing things, without thinking. And you can live your whole life like that. I think when we are forced to start over, which is, the silver lining of starting over, is that when you're forced to start over, either by a situation you created or somebody else created for you, whichever way, it really gives you, it brings you to a standstill where you can stop for a minute or months, whatever, a year, two, I don't know. But you're forced to stop and re-examine yourself. If you allow yourself to, you can spend the whole time crying and whining and complaining, or you can just start to really re-examine your own life, the decisions that you've made, the things that you've done, and how you got where you are. And again, it's not easy. It is very difficult, because you're having to really face yourself in taking ownership. I think this is also a time when you get to take ownership of yourself, of the things that you've done and said, of the things that you have allowed in your life, of everything, in saying, this is who I am, this is who I became through all these experiences, through all these things, and really re-examine that and say, is this how I want to continue? So the starting over gives us that break in our very busy lives where we are not self-aware, or we're just going through the motions and doing what we have to do to survive or whatever. So when we are forced to start over, I think it's honestly a gift to re-examine your inner world. What is going on in your head? What is going on in your heart? What is going on physically out there? How are you showing up? What are the beliefs? Because I think the internal work is more important. What are the beliefs that you have held about yourself? Again, this is you examining your identity. Where have you put your trusts? Who have you put your trust in? And really asking the very, very hard questions, which I don't think we get to ask ourselves when we're so busy. And when we're starting over, we are given that chance to ask ourselves, so that when we rebuild this life, we are building it from a very different place, a different angle. We are building it with a different understanding. So that is on the identity work. And I can do another video on a more detailed identity work that is required for this reinvention, for this, second act. Of course, in starting over, there are practical things that you also have to deal with, which is money, which is time, which is support, right? So you want to be honest about where you are in terms of your finances. You want to be honest about what needs to be changed there. You want to be, honest about the time constraints in your life, what you can and cannot do. You want to be honest about the support that you have or don't have, right? And we're not romanticizing the struggle. We're just going to acknowledge that there's a reality of constraints that we have to work within. So you want to be ready for that. And I'll give you an example. So if you're starting a business and just starting, from zero, and you are, that is a constraint. There's a constraint for time if you're a mother and you have a family and you're running, you have a household that you're running. There's might be a constraint of money because if you're starting from zero financially, you're building a business. You're going to have to do a lot of bootstrapping and all kinds of stuff, different from someone who's got investors or, that's a very different way of starting a business. So, what is sustainable? What can you do with the time constraints that you have? What can you do with the financial constraints that you have? What can you do with the supports that you have? Because everybody is going to be in a very different situation in regards to that. But there are usually a lot of constraints that we all face in this starting over. And you need to, to acknowledge that there are things that you don't know in this process of starting over, that what you know now, that may be, or how do I say this? The things that you might not know. Because you're starting into something, maybe you are starting something new in this starting over process. You are beginning to learn something. So you might have to, learn something. So there might be learning curves. A lot of time there's a learning curve that's required when we're starting over, because we are moving into a new season, we are moving into a new territory, moving into new maybe industry, moving into just a whole different thing than what we had before. And with that, we need to give ourselves the grace that we are starting over. We're going to have to learn some things, and we're going to have to unlearn some things, right? So we've had beliefs and things that we have carried throughout our lives that we might have to unlearn, habits that we might have to unlearn, skills that we might have to learn, right? So there's maybe some unlearning that is required as we're starting over, and some learning that is required. So you might be taking up a new skill to learn something different. For myself, it was, the skill of learning AI, and, that's never ending. But that's a new skill that I had to learn, right? But there are also behaviors that you might have to unlearn in life as you're starting over, things that really didn't help your life before, that you might want to unlearn so that you pick on new habits, new things. Something else that happens in the starting over is, how you have to start to build self-trust again. And I'm very big on boldness and courage and all those things. Boldness comes when we have built the trust within ourselves. And a lot of times, because we are starting over, because something was destroyed or something was lost, we tend to, the thing that gets eroded in women especially is the self-trust, because the relationship we've had for so long is no longer there. We don't trust ourselves to carry on without somebody else, because the job we've always relied on is no longer there. We don't trust ourselves to be able to make, more money than what we used to start afresh, because the business we had is gone. You don't trust yourself that you can build something else again and make as much money. So there's all these things that can happen that just erodes our self-trust. And in the starting over, we really have to learn how to rebuild that, to show up for ourselves consistently. Is always the thing that I talk about when we talk about self-trust, is when you build the muscle of showing up for yourself consistently, you are learning to be more confident and to be more bold. When you are keeping promises that you made to yourself, not to others as much, but to yourself, this is how you build self-trust. Because then your brain, your mind says, oh yeah, we do things that we say we're going to do. We're keeping promises that we've made to ourselves. So it is very important that we rebuild the self-trust as we are starting over, so that we can grow the confidence that we want to. If you want to be more confident, if you want to show up with confidence and boldness, it really starts within, where you're building that self-trust within yourself. A lot of times starting over does feel like a failure, right? Even though it isn't. And a lot of us look at it as defeat, as I failed. And, just because you're ending something or something is ended does not mean it was a failure. A lot of times because the season has come to an end. And for myself, I've really just come to a place where I'm holding things in my life very loosely. I hold relationships very loosely. I hold businesses or whatever I'm doing very loosely. Because what I know for sure is that, you actually don't have control in a lot of these things. And because there are a lot of times other people involved, right? And also because God is involved, and God might say, this is over. We need to move on to something else. So if you get yourself so attached to relationships, to people, to things that you own, to the house, to the business, to the job, what happens when it's time to move? Maybe again, because, something has happened that has caused you to have to let go of that. Or because honestly, sometimes God is saying the season is over. But if you're so attached to something, it is hard to let go. It is hard to understand that the season is over. And when I say I hold things loosely, I'm not saying I don't have deep relationships with people. It's just that I don't hold people to where they should be in my life for the rest of my life. I've really come to a place where I understand that there are seasons, that there are people in my life that are there for a season. And when it's time for them to leave, I have to let them go. And then there are people that are meant to be in my life for the rest of my life. And those I hold on to. But you have to give yourself, the people in your life, the things in your life, and God the room to move back and forth so that you are not devastated every time somebody's leaving, right? You are not devastated every time you have to let go of something. Yeah, you might grieve the thing, but you're not wallowing in grief for 5 years or whatever years. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we don't understand seasons of life that we all get to live through. And that understanding of seasons really enables you to just say, okay, maybe the time here is over. And, I'm moving on to something else and something greater. Because I do believe when God says, it's time to move forward, it's time to leave this behind, is because there's something better for you. And you have to put your trust in that there is something out there better than what you've had. And move with that belief and having that faith. And so when you feel like it's a failure, a lot of times it's because you feel like things cannot be redeemed. You feel like, this was the best version of you or the best thing that could ever happen to you, instead of thinking the future probably holds something better than what I've had. No matter how good something you had was, there's always a better version, I believe. So when you start looking at starting over as if it's a failure and it's more of a redirection, it's not defeat. When we start to reframe failure in our lives, the starting over becomes you're evolving. It's an evolution of who you are. You're also realigning. Maybe there's been a misalignment in your life, and now you're starting to realign with the truth of who you are and who you were meant to be. So we don't carry the shame, because usually when we feel like failures, because we have so much shame about our past, about the mistakes that we've had. Like, who hasn't made mistakes? Who hasn't made financial mistake, relationship mistakes, job mistake, career mistakes, business mistakes? Everyone has, right? And a lot of times the people who are very successful has made tremendous mistakes in their past. They just might not talk about them, but everybody makes mistakes. So when we start to reframe our mistakes or failures into what they are, which is a chance to start over, recalibrate things, reassess things, realign things, and allow ourselves to evolve, it really just makes it okay and makes it easier to start over. And I think the best thing about starting over is that there is so much potential, and the possibilities are endless. Because in shedding, right, in shedding of the old stuff, in shedding of whatever it may be for you, the career, the business, the relationship, the weights, right? For women, a lot of times it's our weights. In shedding of those things of the past and having this chance to start over, then life just opens up. I feel like if you allow yourself, you see the options and the possibilities and the second chance of alignment, of doing things the way that you should have done probably years ago and didn't. And now you're getting another chance to start. You're getting another chance to build the life that is in alignment with who you are, to build the life that really God wants you to build in a way that is the right way instead of how you probably did it when you're younger. So you are building, you are rebuilding afresh. You're building something new with a whole big foundation of wisdom. And the possibilities, I'm just telling you, they're endless. And it is exciting. And I think this is, I feel like, as I'm approaching 50, is that there is so much to look forward to of what God has for me in the future that I'm excited. And I know a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be 50, and that freaks a lot of people. But to me, it's like it's a chance to really start over, right? To begin again on different things and different levels, to learn new things, because I'm a very different person now. I'm very different. And you evolved, you've changed. Again, your values, your things have just changed. And starting over gives you a chance. And that's what's for me exciting, even moving into this tech industry and AI stuff. It was just like my eyes were open to the possibilities that are out there. Excuse me. My eyes were open to the possibilities that are out there. And it's just exciting. And I don't know, it's exciting to me. I know some people are scared of it, but it's exciting to me, being in my late 40s and like, oh my gosh, there's so much out there that I can do. And also because the kids are older, which is nicer, it's, the freedom that comes with starting over. There is a freedom that comes with starting over because you get to choose again. I think earlier on in our 20s and 30s, we're not really choosing with alignment or values. We are just doing what needs to be done. We are trying to survive, right? There's a lot of stuff going on internally. So getting to this place where you get to choose again, and you get to choose with wisdom, you get to choose with alignment, I think that is the greatest place. And it's exciting. So I'm hoping you are also excited in the second chapter with, if you're starting over, that you're excited about your starting over. And look at it as an opportunity, as a second chance to choose again and to choose yourself, which is the biggest thing, the greatest thing you can do for yourself. So if you're new here, again, my name is Janet, and please subscribe. I'd like you to join our community that we have, and the link is in the description. And I'll see you next time. Bye.